Hi, welcome to episode 13 of Data Mesh TV. Today's show is going to be completely in Spanish. Maria Jose Lopez and myself, vamos a hablar de data mesh. No, it'll be in English, but we might mix some Spanish in. Really happy to have Maria Jose. She works out of the Paris office for OnePoint. She is a data transformation leader. And today's show, we probably need 3 hours, but we're going to try to kind of squeeze in the conversation in 30 minutes. We want to talk about data mesh implementations, of course, but we want to kind of think about it from the lens of a data transformation leader. And we want to kind of talk through some practical tips, some challenges, and also just have a broader conversation about how companies should address or how companies should approach their data mesh implementation, making sure that they're not just bringing technology forward, but first and foremost, that they're actually focused on the actual people that we want to kind of drive towards adoption, drive towards a data-driven culture. So I'm excited. Maria Jose, welcome to the show.
Hello, Adrian. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And you're in Paris now.
Yes, absolutely. I'm in Paris. Well, I don't see the Eiffel Tower from here, but it's not pretty far.
I love if you're ever in Paris, you got to give Maria Jose and OnePoint a call. They have the best view of the Eiffel Tower from the roof of their building. You stand up there, especially in the evening, it's incredible. So maybe you're going to get a lot of messages on LinkedIn, Maria, but definitely recommend everyone gives you a call.
For sure. You are all welcome.
Fantastic. So let's jump into the conversation. So data transformation. So even before data mesh existed, we've been talking about digital transformation, data transformation. It isn't a new topic. You've been doing this for a while. Then comes data mesh, and I don't know necessarily the data mesh has changed a lot. You'll correct me as an expert. When I think about what we're trying to do on the data mesh side, a lot of the principles that we've always talked about, a lot of the basics that we've been thinking through when we were talking digital transformation 5 years ago, or driving data-driven culture, if you will, transformation 5 years ago, I think a lot of those same principles still hold true. We're still talking about, first and foremost, focusing on the organization and the people. Data mesh, depending on who you talk to, introduces change at various levels, right? We're working with architects to think through how we start modeling a decentralized architecture, dealing with what we already have today, as opposed to changing a whole lot. So on the IT side, we're saying, let's try to minimize movement. Let's try to minimize change. So maybe there's less change if we do this right on the architecture side. But on the front end, when we think about the organization and the teams, the consumers that are going to adopt data mesh, that's where I think the biggest change really plays in. So let's start with the basics, right? Let's just maybe if you can help us walk through some basic data transformation principles, that'd be great.
Yes, for sure. So indeed, in large data transformations, in large companies, the main topic is not data mesh or is not like technical challenge. For me, we have like 4 key points when we really need to address to become to help a company become really data driven. So for me, we have to be sure that we are rethinking and at the right level organization and new roles. We really need to think user. So we need to rethink the user experience for the new data products we are implementing in the company. We also need to think about technologies, meaning technologies easy to be used to make the collaborators and the user life easier.
Mhm.
And finally, the communication. The communication part is really important because, as you said, as an architect, you know a lot of theoretical and important information about technologies, but most of the collaborators in the company, most of the users, they're not used to speak about this language and speak about these key terms. So it's very important in terms of communication to make this theory easy to be understood by everybody. So it's really important to invest in communication and to be sure that everybody have like the same level of understanding of the challenge and about why we need to use technologies and why we need to valorize our data.
I want to come back to that last point on kind of thinking through the communication piece, because I was at a conversation yesterday. I was at a CDO conference here in Houston, and I was talking to 2 CDOs, and they were both struggling with communicating architecture change, right? So they were interested in driving a concept of data products, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But what they were struggling with was sitting in front of business leaders, and one of them said arguing, another one said influencing. But the idea was they felt like they were trying to communicate to business leaders why we were making architectural changes. It has to be this way because architecture says so.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, we said, well, we're missing a why, right? We're missing a benefit. We're missing, and that's really important because, again, going back to data mesh principles, we think about abstracting the technology layer. And so when I'm communicating to a consumer, when I'm communicating to a data mesh user, so to speak, I don't know that I ever want to have to communicate. Hopefully, I will get to a point where I'm not talking about the changes I'm making on the back end. Hopefully, I'm not talking about the movement I have to make on the back end. Hopefully, I'm talking about the value that domains and data products and autonomous ways of working and self-service create. And so I think it's not just communicating all the details. In fact, it's just communicating the right things to the right people to kind of almost motivate them to change. Being honest about the challenges, but also kind of hoping that you're communicating in a way that incites them, that kind of gets them going, so to speak. So on the challenges part, we think, and as an old architect, so to speak, we often think the hardest part about the mesh is that connectivity, right? And because we've been building pipelines, we've been managing data transformation, overwhelmed by it quite a bit for so long. For us, that feels like the hardest thing. And it feels like something that we're hoping that data mesh is going to help with. As a data transformation lead, in our previous conversation, you said, actually, Adrian, that's not the hardest thing. How you describe the hardest part in a data transformation?
For me, the hardest part is, as I said just before, like to be sure that everybody is aligned on the same challenge and the same objectives about why we are doing this transformation. Besides that, so we need to have the right levels of sponsorship, not only on the technical side of the company, but mostly on the business side of the company, because finally, the business side of the company, these are the people that are really innovating into new products for the future of the company. So this sponsorship part is really important. And finally, the third challenge for me is about being sure that we are using the right technologies, the right process, to be sure that people are really using the data. Because, as you say, maybe we can have the best architecture, the best technologies, but if the data is not used, the data is not valorized and is not boosting the business of the company, we are not doing our transformation on the right way. So to wrap up is have the right sponsorship on the business side, to be sure that people are really using the data, and to be sure that we are doing the right transformation with the right technologies and the right organization.
Yeah, let's dig that inside a little bit. I think data-driven culture, data-driven transformation, data-driven decisions. Data-driven became a buzzword a while back, and even before, I joined this side of the world, so to speak. As a CDO, I use that term almost everywhere I could because it was almost like a ticket to get into the conversation. Why are we doing it? Data-driven. What are we doing? Data-driven. I think at some point we forgot to ask who's driving. And I like your position there on the business, number one. I always say if you want to drive fast, give the business the keys. But it's a really key principle in a data mesh. I do think, by the way, most data mesh people that I talk to get it, right? The idea of enabling teams to drive on their own. I don't know if those teams are always ready to drive. And when we start thinking about, I know when we talk through, building a data mesh strategy, and we talk to companies about where to start, because where to start is, there's no easy answer. Hopefully you'll agree with me, Maria. For some companies, they've committed to a big data mesh strategy. They're going to get there. They're committed, and they're ready to start taking the small steps to get there. But their plan is big and broad. Domains, data products, autonomous, federated governance, whole 9 yards, so to speak. For other organizations, they're not sure yet. And so it's like, well, I like the ideas. I'm not sure my consumers are ready to drive. And that's a really, I think it's a very insightful decision. If your consumers aren't ready to drive, maybe you should not build domains yet. Maybe you start with data products. And I think I see more and more companies starting this way. They're like, I know that we'll need a data mesh at some point, but if I could start building data products today, even if I build them all on the IT side and I just deliver them to the business, I can start getting them to think about how to use them. And then eventually, hopefully, I'll get a consumer that's going to raise their hand and say, I'm ready to drive. And so I think there's two paths that companies can take. One is for consumers that are not, or business teams that aren't ready to drive, you build the data products for them, and you slowly work towards a point when they start to say, hey, to your point, I've got the right technology. This is easy. I can do this myself. And of course, if your consumer's already ready to go, so to speak, then yeah, you can give them the keys early, so to speak. But I think there's two different paths, and I don't think there's a right way to go. I think it depends on what you want to do, how quickly you want to get there. And as I said, to underscore it again one more time, it depends on your consumer. Have you seen your customers or companies you're working with start with data products?
Absolutely, this is our main advice, because as you say, when we have some CDOs and some companies that are interested to move into a data mesh framework, when you say you put like all the axis of the transformation could be really huge,
Right.
and maybe take a long time. So in terms of rentability, it's really difficult to say to the investors, okay, so we are launching a transformation, see you in 5 years. So of course, no investor will go with us to do that. So as you say, we need to move fast, and we need to prove that the framework is the right framework, like really fast, to demonstrate that have value for the consumers, for the company, and for the user of the company. So as you say, the data product is for us the really most important topic, because this really will help us to be sure that we are not centralizing the data again. I mean, just to be sure that we are on the right page. So if we go into a global transformation, you say that sometimes maybe the domains don't have the skills sometimes, because it has to be on the right way in terms of architecture and data engineering. So okay, so how do? Do we centralize again and we help them to build data products? This is not the right approach. So the right approach is to help them to build the first data products together, to do this learning by doing process, because we are building the first data products of the company, and to prove to the other domains that these products are useful, are used, and are easy to design and implement and maintain in the long term. So yes, for me to go into data transformation, in large data transformation, we have to start small with data products and prove to the other domains and to the entire company that is just easier to duplicate this approach and then industrialize step by step, and not all the topics on the same time.
Let's put this into a journey, because I like where we're going with this. And I think there may be someone in the audience kind of just building their roadmap and maybe listening and thinking how they would sequence this, right? And so if I were building the sequence, the first thing I would do is the first milestone for you is just making sure that you've addressed the connectivity part. You can't even start thinking about building data products until you have access to the data, right? So connectivity is my first step, right? And hopefully, shameless plug, you're using something like Starburst to create that connectivity. But there's, in any data mesh ecosystem, you'll have a number of tools that are helping you to integrate across your data sources. You don't migrate unless you have to. So you've got the connectivity part. That's your first milestone. if your second milestone is data products, and I do like this approach, and for there are some, and I'm going to be one of those that says, hold on a second, you can't stop there. I'm not saying you stop there, but as a second step, building data products, so you can start to train your central IT teams, your engineers, on how to build them. You can make your mistakes internally without kind of making bigger mistakes on the business side, and so you can get really good at it from a central shared services perspective and start to deliver data products to teams in that way and start to get some wins. What's the difference? We're going from building pipelines and basically rebuilding the same things over and over again every time a different customer asks for the same data assets, to building reusable data products that we're publishing in a catalog that people can easily find and consume. It's beautiful. How we can separate show about what the data products look like, how big they are, how they're used. It's up to you. It's up to your consumer. As long as they can be found, as long as they have rich metadata and descriptions, as long as we understand how they're put together so we can recreate it in a consistent way, there's your data product. Step 3, and here's where I think we want to make sure that we highlight this. You don't stop there. You're going to get, if all you're doing is building data products, you're going to get a quick win. Fantastic, right? And your people are going to say, hi, they're doing great job. Look at these data products. But if you really want to achieve the bigger win, I do believe you're going to have to, at some point, start to create these domains. It'll be overwhelming for IT. For a little while, it'll feel better because people are using data products. But then once people start asking for more and more data products, you've got 2 problems. One is the backlog of building new data products. And number 2 is, on the IT side, we really don't understand the business. We can build data products if we sit in the business. And so if you really want to maximize the idea of a data product, you allow the teams that understand the data the best, the business teams, maybe the data science teams, the consumer, you enable them to build their data products, or you work with them very closely in a domain, a dedicated domain, to build those data products. So I think if you want to exploit the full capabilities of data mesh, you're going to have to get there anyway. How fast you get there, when you get there, where you get there, right? You don't do that for everybody. Maybe you do that for some teams first and let everybody else come along. That's completely up to you, but you're going to have to get there, I think. Am I overselling it, Maria? What you think that makes sense?
Absolutely, Adrian.
Okay.
Absolutely. And just to go back to the people experience, I think that so after the domain part, I think that is really important to go back in a kind of a data marketplace. This is how we call it, because okay, great. So now we have the data products. Now we have the domains. Is great. But now we have to be sure. And this is about the people, about how we make sure that they are using it, that it's easy to them to use it, and it's easy to them to get the access and to maintain. So for me, like if I might add a 4th step into this journey, for me the data marketplace is really important.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, that's you know what, you're right. I'm not sure that isn't it's tied together with data products. If I'm going to create data products, I need a marketplace to publish. Almost even before I'm building domains, I need a marketplace. It's interesting. We use the word now, marketplace, data hub, catalog, so interchangeably. And I feel like recently I'm having that conversation. Some people would say, well, the same thing. Other people would say, well, no. And again, it depends on every organization. But whatever term you're using, I think what we're talking about, Maria Jose and I, is we're talking about a place to publish data products where people can access them and understand them, right? Take them off the shelf, read what it is. I always say I'd like to think in a data mesh, you should allow everyone in the organization to pick up any data product and read it, right? They may not be able to open the box. They may not be able to see the data if they don't have the entitlement. But if you want to drive transformation, be transparent, right? Open it up. Let people see what's available so they can very quickly find what they need. And then if they need it, they can request permission. I think sometimes in your data transformation experience, Maria, see if you've seen this, I feel like sometimes we too early in the journey, we're starting to apply a lot of governance, and we're starting to tighten controls too much. Controls are great. If I'm a bank, controls are necessary. I get it, but I think sometimes early in a transformation journey, depending on where you start, but it's useful to kind of leave it a little bit open. Let teams innovate. Let teams make mistakes, not big mistakes, but if you let them run a little bit up front, I always feel like they can really start to see the value. And if you tighten the controls too much, you put them in a box, and they are almost too limited to really fully appreciate that. Is that something you recommend to your teams in terms of how would you recommend data governance, or where would you apply data governance early in a journey?
For me, we have a hypothesis that everybody, if is enough smart to get into the data governance practice and processes, but they can do that only the information is available. So we come back to the marketplace. So we don't have to control and say, do this, do that. If we have the right communication, if we are agreed on the company framework of governance, and if the information is available and easy to be used, for me, the governance is kind of transparent, and we are more talking about facilitation, okay, how can I make this easier to these people to communicate to these other people, this domain, to be sure that they have like the right contracts to work well. Is more about facilitation than really governance, like
Yeah, well,
maybe.
I come back to your 4 points: organization, technology, user experience, and communication. And so when we think about governance, you're right. I love facilitation. Seems much more easier for a user, right? Hey, I'm not here to control you. I'm here to facilitate your acceleration. I'm here to facilitate your enablement. I'm here to facilitate your delivery. Yeah, I think that resonates. So let's going back to our roadmap. Step 1 is connectivity. Step 2 is, for some companies, you might decide, I'm going to start with data products. Not for everybody. Some people will say, I'm going to build a domain. That's a decision you want to make. If you're building data products first, then third step probably is very quickly to get some kind of a marketplace or catalog in place so you can publish your data products. If you don't have one, you might offer data products to an isolated team via an API or an ODBC, or some simple way for them to get it. But longer term, you want a catalog for everybody to be able to find them, and they can do the same thing, but it's about the search capability is the real difference. The next step, then, we're talking about governance, right? And how you start thinking about how you apply governance. Obviously, you want to build controls in the data product in the beginning, but when we think about governance, what we're talking about here is applying the right level of governance. If you apply the right level of governance, you're facilitating delivery. If you apply too much governance, you're inhibiting innovation, right? You're inhibiting delivery, right? And so that's where I think the concept of federated computational governance in a data mesh, and it's a topic that a lot of us maybe don't always jump into, because we start talking about things like sidecars. If you've read the book, it might be, some people would say we're not ready for that. But if you just think about federated governance and the ability to make and apply the right level of governance in the right place, then you're truly facilitating and you're driving that user experience. Fantastic. Good. Yeah, this is good. Let me go back to my notes here.
Anyways, this journey, if I was a user, I would be ready to go to this journey.
Let's do it. Maybe it's also worth talking about the other path, right? So one path is start with data products, which I quite like, and I agree with you. More and more companies are doing that. I still see, I would say, the majority of the customers that I work with do start with a domain. And let's talk about how that fits, because I want to get your thoughts on something. When I talk to customers and they feel a bit overwhelmed or they feel not ready to start designing domains, I know one thing I see is we sit down for the early sessions and they give me a map and they're like, here are the 32 domains that we're thinking about. Like, whoa, time out. I think if you start overthinking your domains too early in the process, I think you might be disappointed in the sense that what they end up looking like is quite different than what you started. Some of the best data meshes that I know that are out there have just a handful of domains. I know a great one that has 5 domains, right? So I think most people will be surprised at how many domains they're going to need. What they're going to like in 10 years, I don't know. But 3 or 2 years in, you don't need that many domains. So first is don't think that you need a whole bunch up front. The reason why I think is because when you start to build domains, Maria, I always tell customers to start with the teams that from an organizational perspective, they're already set up that way. When I look at some of the financial organizations and some of the pharmaceutical organizations that have really run with data mesh, where you're looking at how quickly they're working and how mature they are, and you say, how did they get there so quick? You know why? They didn't have a lot of organizational change. They built a domain across an existing organizational team. They were already set up like a domain. All data mesh has done is given them the technology capability and some process to help them run a little faster, so to speak, or a lot faster, but they didn't make any organizational changes. I'm not saying that's true in the whole company, but when you're planning that first domain, I always say if you can do that with an existing team without making organizational changes, you're going to be better off. What do you think?
I think that it's important to separate like organization transformation, like and like the technological transformation. So for sure, I think we have to start with the existing organization, but I think that when we are getting more and more mature and having more and more data products, and we are maybe creating new business opportunities, new business lines, maybe this will help us to evolve maybe in the future the organization. But for sure, we don't have to rethink the organization to do data mesh. This is sure.
Yeah.
When I said at the beginning that we have to rethink the organization, is much more about the roles, the process, the right level more or less of decision of authority in the innovation process. And I was not really talking about, okay, so let's disrupt a financial domain into three. No, it's much more about new opportunities, new process, new roles, and new responsibilities.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean, because I don't want anyone out there thinking, oh, I don't have to make any organization. It doesn't mean that you don't have to. You will at some point. As you start to grow your mesh across your ecosystem. Let's be honest. We all look at our companies and say they're not ready today, but when they're ready, we're going to have to find a way to change the way they work. Right? We're going to have to find a way. Maybe they've got the wrong people in the team. Maybe the team is kind of set up as a hybrid team across too many verticals, and so down the road, you're probably for some groups, you're going to need to make some changes. I always feel like it's easier to make a change, or it's easier to influence change when you've got wins in your pocket, And so if you start early in your journey and you haven't even proven anything, and you start trying to go to people and say, hey, let's go make some changes to the organization, it's good luck, right? Unless you have a really strong stakeholder, it's hard to do. But when you've built momentum and you've got a couple of wins, you built a pathfinder, and you have a showcase, and people are seeing that it works really, really well, that confidence, that momentum, those early wins, they decide they give you the capital you need to go to other leaders and say, okay, if you want to work this way, it doesn't happen by magic. We need to make organizational change.
For sure. You need to capitalize on success. So when you have done your transformation, when you have success, when you have the data that is more used, once that you are doing more artificial intelligence, once that you are doing much more data visualization, this is when also, thanks to data, you can see that you have some performance to be win if you merge, for example, some domains and you apply some reorganization. But as you say, I think it's important to capitalize on success and to take decisions based on the data that you will have available to do this organizational change, but based on insights that you have.
Insights improved. Love it. Hey, I usually break off and do the summary by myself, but let's do the summary together. Let's close up the session together. Let's see what the key things that we talked about, and I took some notes. I think summary point number one, right? It's okay to start with data products, and me personally, I prefer to start with a Pathfinder that builds a domain and data product so you can kind of test the whole thing. But I certainly appreciate a lot of organizations, and Maria, you're working with them already, I think, to start with data products. Nothing wrong with that, right? That's my first summary point that I think is important. What else would you add to that? What would you pull out of the conversation to underscore, Maria, on your side?
About the starting point for me, communication. So be sure that we share the same challenge, the same objectives, and the reason why we are doing this transformation.
Yeah.
So communication, super important. And then, yeah, if we retake our journey, so we speak about marketplace. So giving to the collaborator and the user access to the products and the domains that will be available. And finally, implement governance, but more into a facilitation approach than a top-bottom decision process.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to steal that. Whenever I talk governance, I'm going to start talking about facilitation, because I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to give you guide rails so that you can run really, really fast. The other thing I think that we talked a bit about is the proof, right? The building confidence early, getting some early wins so that you can build that momentum internally. I think that's a really important piece. Before we get off, I want to test some language here, because I have a hard time talking data mesh in Spanish. En español no hay una palabra de data mesh. In Spanish is data mesh.
Redes de datos. ¿Qué te parece?
Bueno, okay. Redes de datos. Okay, ya, it's done. That's the new word for everybody. Data products in Spanish.
Huh. me voy. Chao.
Okay, pass. Data-driven culture. Más fácil, ¿no?
Sí, una cultura centrada en los datos.
Perfect. Last one. How about we do autonomous domains?
Huh. Okay, I leave now for the.
Fantastic. Hey, great show. Thank you for your guidance and your advice and your expertise on data transformation. I'm sure the audience enjoyed the show, and I look forward to your feedback. We'll put a blog about today's show out there so you guys can read a little more about any topics that we missed, including the topics that we discussed. Have a great day. Thank you.